On business and on the economy is Dr. Azar Jamine from Econometrics. Dr. Jamine, thanks so much for coming in this lunchtime. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Stephen.
So far, the results seem to be in line with expectations. I presume that's good for business.
Broadly speaking, it is in line with expectations. No huge surprises. So there are some minor surprises. From the point of view of continuity and stability, yes, that is positive for business. But it also can be interpreted as implying a continuation of the kind of status quo that has contributed towards a very low growth rate in recent years. In other words, yes, the ANC may still remain strongly in power, but there's no major force that is going to necessarily drive it to really get to grips with fighting corruption and state capture, which has contributed towards the decline in the economy, and to make the structural changes that are necessary. And then on the other side, it appears as if the predicted potential increase in support for the EFF is maybe not as great as we thought it would be, and that means less pressure on the ANC after the elections to move towards the left and to introduce land expropriation without compensation in a reckless manner and to nationalize the Reserve Bank. So it's a bit of both, and I think that on a net basis we don't see a major change.
I mean, what's interesting about that is through the campaign, radical voices. I use the word radical. I mean, it's a contested term, but let me just use it for the sake of argument for the moment. They gained a lot of attention there. In some ways, they dominated the campaign. We're seeing that voters actually aren't with the volume. They're actually they're actually more to the centre than was perhaps thought.
Yes, and to the extent that they're more to the centre, that will placate quite a lot of investors. But there's nothing to get terribly excited about to encourage a surge in investment afterwards either. We have indeed found that some of the new left-wing parties like the Black First, Land First and the Socialist Workers' Party haven't gained any ground. And to that extent it's positive, but we haven't either seen anything to get too excited about.
There's been a lot of talk before this election about this magical figure for the ANC, talks about what that would do for President Cyril Ramaphosa, the idea, I suppose, being that the better a mandate for the ANC, the better it would be for him and chances of reforming the economy. Again, heavily contested, heavily criticized by some people. Is that idea of a magical figure still there? Do investors still believe that?
I'm not convinced at all that there is a magical figure that will allow President Ramaphosa to impose his ideas more forcefully than that has been the case previously. I think there's still going to be a lot of skepticism as to how much he's going to have to pander to the factional side of the ANC that appears to be pushing back on some of those reforms. I think we're going to have to wait and see, and the key event here is going to be the appointment, in the short term, is going to be the appointment of the new cabinet. Firstly, is he going to reduce the size of the cabinet to show a commitment towards reducing government spending? Secondly, is he going to exclude a lot of those characters who've been associated with state capture?
I suppose all of this goes in different ways. I mean, cabinet is possibly the most important signal that he could send after this election.
I think cabinet will be the most important short-term signal. From a longer-term point of view, we're going to have to see to what extent does he follow that up with bringing to book people who have been convicted of state capture, and secondly, whether all this investment that he has promised actually starts materializing. Thus far, it's just been talk. We haven't seen practical evidence in a big way, in a meaningful way that can turn around the declining trend of the South African economy. So we have to wait to see. And I don't think there's going to be clarity in that regard for at least another year.
Normally, I would imagine an investor sitting in New York, Beijing, London doesn't care too much about a South African provincial election. But in this case, Gauteng, if the ANC were to lose it, at the moment on the current trends, it doesn't look like it. But if they were, would that be something investors would consider because it would be seen to be weakening President Ramaphosa?
Only up to a point. I think it would be considered to be an impediment to structural reform. But on the other hand, it can also be interpreted positively as the fact that there is a section of the population that is absolutely fed up with state capture, and that it may compel the ANC to take some of these opposition views a little more seriously.
In the end, South Africa's real problem, of course, is lack of growth. 56% youth unemployment. An election obviously doesn't lead to growth, but it can lead to a change in sentiment.
Without a doubt, the election can lead to a change in sentiment, but this is where I don't think that we're seeing enough of a change to send a message that will necessarily change sentiment significantly for the better. The positive news is that it's not going to worsen sentiment. Will it result in a huge improvement in sentiment? I have my doubts.
I suppose at this point the question is what would lead to that huge change in sentiment? I mean, some of whatever those things could be, maybe a cabinet, maybe other shifts somewhere. It's quite difficult to know what investors would be looking for. I suppose they'll be looking for something maybe in the internal politics of the ANC.
They will be looking at signals of changes in the internal politics of the ANC. In fact, the very reason why Ramaphosa took over for 3 months at the beginning of last year is because people believed that there would be a change in the factional makeup of the ANC, and that many of those who supported Zuma would now come and right behind and support Ramaphosa. That does not appear to have been the case. We now have to wait to see, is that likely to that view going to win ground again? I'm skeptical about that.
I suppose one of the things, I mean, and it's quite difficult to quantify this, is the idea of whether or not President Ramaphosa is sort of more his own president after an election. He would be able to hit the ground running because he wouldn't just be starting from scratch. He would, have had the levers of power for quite some time and be able to use them.
I think definitely the optimists will say that he will start almost immediately impacting on the environment, firstly through the kind of cabinet that he selects, secondly by pushing on the fight against corruption more readily, but we are not going to be able to be convinced about it for a good few months, I think.
Dr. Azar Jamine, thank you very much indeed for coming in. I really do appreciate it. Dr. Azar Jamine, Chief Economist at Econometrics, with us now.